When Jill Biden delivered that pointed critique of Melania Trump, drawing sharp lines between ceremony and sincerity, the exchange was never merely a personal jab but a clash between contrasting archetypes, the First Lady rooted in a legacy of public service and empathy, and the former First Lady who inhabited the role as part of a transactional spectacle. And Melania's one-liner comeback, quiet yet volcanic, reversed the moment's momentum, turning what could have been a soundbite into a seismic rhetorical quake that rippled through social media, political watchers, and living rooms across the nation, reverberating far beyond its words. In that instant, the raw exchange of political theater became a crystallized study of confidence, thin-skinned power, and the potency of brevity. Jill's remark, steeped in presumed moral upper hand, carried the weight of institutional expectation, that the First Lady should be more than an accessory or a photo opportunity, but her tone, though meant to chastise, revealed a well-worn certainty, a stock of sanctimony that too often accompanies inherited entitlement. Melania's response, short and composed, didn't spar back, it reframed this conflict not in kind, but in clarity. Her single-line riposte, cutting like ice, exposed that the bigger battle isn't about protocol or tradition, it's about who gets to define them. By refusing to rise into the ring of moral virtue, by simply landing one clean truth, she paused the narrative, not through desperation or deflection, but through contained assertion. And in that pause, the country felt something rare, the displacement of ritual aggression by a stillness too precise to ignore. The stunned silence that followed was not emptiness, it was a recalibration. The nation witnessed not just a comeback, but a pivot, from pageantry to power, from scripted suspicion to spontaneous honesty. Suddenly, what reporters had labeled First Lady Feud 2.0 was reframed not as gossip fodder but as a generational test of rhetorical ownership. Jill's words spoke to an audience longing for authenticity. Melania's line reminded them that authority doesn't need explanation, only presence. The tension wasn't binary, it was dialectical, the inheritor of a soft brand of empathy, versus the one whose reticence held an unspoken claim to autonomy. Jill's insult had drawn its strength from a blanket assumption of presidential legitimacy. Melania's reply drew its power from refusing to grant that legitimacy its usual deference, and in doing so, questioned whether public roles are ever owed their courtesy or if that courtesy must be earned daily, especially when media coverage often reduces legacy to lineage. Under the scrutiny of pundits and political psychologists, the push and pull surfaced deeper questions. Was Jill's criticism an act of accountability or arrogance? Was Melania's comeback confidence or concealment? Analysts seized on her steely calm, calling it a lesson in emotional discipline, but critics argued it was emotion unspoken. The public, however, experienced it not as ambiguity but as aftermath, the evaporation of performative tension into a drop of cold water on a heated stage. In that condensation, something crystallized. Power no longer dresses up in virtue, and rebuttal doesn't have to roar to resonate. The legacy of the line would not show in pundit scorecards but in cultural memory, stored as a module of civility redefined. No glaring spotlight, just the cold gleam of a precise blade. As the clip went viral, its afterlife eclipsed both camps. TikToks remixed her gaze, memes captioned the silent floor, conservative commentators praised her repression of theatrics, progressives mourned the loss of moral high ground. But beneath those fractures lay a shared concession. The moment felt real. No canned apology, no rehearsed soundbite, just a sovereign claim to voice that declared, "I don't require your framing to own my space." It became a lesson not only in rhetorical defense, but in emotional jurisdiction. Once equipped with containment, any spark thrown against you loses its fuel. In the succeeding days, think pieces multiplied, some lauding Melania's comeback as a disarming victory against performative progressivism, others decrying it as empty semantics, but most overlooked the deeper fault line. The victory belonged to posture, not position. Jill had authority but faltered through presumption, Melania wielded none but succeeded through precision. Thus, the moment became a case study in asymmetry, demonstrating that power by table setting cannot stand against the quiet persistence of unbending presence. Media retrospectives shifted from the complaint to the counterstrike. The narrative arc tilted. It wasn't just Jill Biden making a misstep, it was a lesson in miscalculated audacity. And Melania, by refusing to expend more than a line, refused the spotlight once it served its purpose. She didn't amplify controversy, she contained it. That fine edge between engagement and escapism became her mode of resistance. Critics called it stubborn, but supporters recognized it as resolve. Observers noted that her line was not reactionary, but reaction-contained. The cultural echo of that moment didn't vanish with the news cycle. In legal forums, communication seminars, leadership workshops, her line was studied as a lesson in the potency of minimalism. Speakers dissected its structure: 3 parts, refusal, retort, reset, packed into a breath. And in that economy of delivery lay the secret: applause follows amplification, authority follows apt containment. Melania may not have won hearts, but she reframed her identity, from ephemeral former First Lady to enduring rhetorical agent. Yet, beneath commendations lay unease. Was this moment a recalibration of decorum, or evidence of emotional armor? Critics cautioned that brevity, when fused with silence, can drift toward avoidance, a shelter behind understatement. But across the spectrum, even detractors conceded its impact. No one ignored the stillness, and in that concession lay the irony: silence became the loudest sound. In the final accounting, the exchange revealed more about the audience than the speakers. We watched not to choose sides, but to reassess our appetite for exposure. The line between insult and insight blurred. The nation was stunned not because Melania hit back, but because she refused to inhale the blow. Politics, we realized, now rewards compression as much as expression. And in one line, she distilled a generational rule: authority is earned in silence, power is measured in control. The aftermath of Melania Trump's precise and piercing one-liner did not dissolve like most political drama. Instead, it seeped deeper into the cultural bloodstream, becoming a kind of lodestar for a new communication paradigm in the modern political arena, one where brevity beats bombast and silence, when deployed with intelligence, carries more consequence than sustained outrage. And in the slow days that followed, the media struggled to move on because the simplicity of Melania's response had left them with little to dissect and even less to distort. She had given no follow-up, no clarification, no tweet, no post, only the line and the echo it left behind, which was perhaps her greatest strategic advantage, as it left the world to interpret her intent, her poise, and her unbending stillness in the face of an attack that seemed to expect noise, not grace, in return. Jill Biden, meanwhile, found herself suspended in a liminal space between moral high ground and public miscalculation, her allies urging her to double down, clarify, humanize, while her critics mocked her for attempting to lecture someone who had long refused to perform for public approval in the first place. And that's what made the contrast so jarring. Jill came from the school of public warmth, accessible leadership, emotionally fluent feminism. Melania operated from a space far colder, less interested in public consensus and more aligned with dignity as distance, with elegance as strategic opacity. The American people, split down generational, ideological, and gendered lines, didn't quite know whom to root for. Some admired Jill's attempt at moral clarity, while others were astonished by Melania's refusal to be morally cornered. And this split wasn't just about partisanship, it was about how people interpreted power. Should it be loud and principled, or quiet and unshakable? Is restraint a form of cowardice or control? The debate evolved past the women themselves, and became a referendum on our own relationship with power, how we want it to look, sound, and respond when challenged. And in that question, it became clear that Melania had touched something nerve-deep in the American subconscious: the idea that you don't have to shout to be sharp, and that mystique is not weakness but weapon. Think pieces emerged dissecting not the insult itself, but the comeback's construction, how a single phrase, absent context, could collapse a narrative so carefully constructed by political media and officialdom, and what it said about the limits of authenticity when weaponized as performance. Because what Jill offered, however well-intended, was a moral swipe wrapped in social expectation, the kind of performative slap that expected either contrition or conflict, and what she received instead was something entirely outside that spectrum. A return serve so cool and exacting that it not only silenced the room, it redefined the emotional physics of the exchange. Suddenly, everyone had to reevaluate the rules. Could elegance be sharper than aggression? Could silence win in an age of amplification? Could an entire cultural atmosphere be changed not by force, but by refusal? And these weren't just academic questions, they reached into boardrooms, classrooms, influencer feeds, and political campaigns, where speechwriters and media consultants found themselves rethinking their messaging strategies, understanding that control was no longer just about narrative, but about emotional architecture, about commanding space without begging for it, about refusing to flinch when provoked, and most of all, about knowing that the most devastating answer is often the one that shows you were never rattled to begin with. In this new model, Melania became not a spokesperson, but a cipher. Her silence and one-line steel offered endless projection, and in that ambiguity, she gained a rare and slippery kind of influence, not based on action, but on interpretation. For days, commentators tried to bait her into elaboration, hoping she'd explain, clarify, or expand, but each time she appeared in public, it was with the same marble-faced reserve, allowing others to fill in the gaps of what she meant, why she said it, and how deeply it landed. And this was not accidental, it was calculated, a mastery of minimalist rhetoric that refused to play into the news cycle's addiction to chaos. Meanwhile, Jill Biden, though equally composed, found herself surrounded by a party apparatus asking hard questions about optics, tone, and the fine line between assertive commentary and unintended elitism. And here, too, the deeper fissures began to appear, not just between political parties but within them. Younger voters questioned why civility was being used to shame rather than connect. Older voters wondered when diplomacy became weakness. The story, originally about two women's personas, morphed into a debate about how much performance politics could still persuade in an era tired of moral speeches and hungry for results. In this shifting terrain, Melania's restraint became currency. Not everyone admired her, but nearly everyone was forced to admit she had found a way to impose stillness on a national discourse constantly scrambling for content. And in that stillness, even Jill Biden's supporters had to sit with the discomfort of a tactic they hadn't expected from someone they'd long underestimated. It was, in a way, the ultimate disruption, not of facts or ideology, but of tempo. Melania disrupted not what was said, but how it was processed, and by refusing to chase the moment, she forced the moment to come to her, which is a kind of power that no title or office alone can bestow. And perhaps that was the most jarring revelation of all, that in a world addicted to speed, simplicity, and scandal, a woman long portrayed as ornamental could deliver the most sophisticated counterpunch, one so still, so silent, so sparing that it functioned like cultural aikido, using the weight of the insult against the one who delivered it. Jill, caught in a position she rarely occupies, on defense, did her best to recover gracefully, issuing a follow-up that tried to reaffirm her values without reigniting the conflict. But it was too late, the mood had shifted, and the attention had moved on, not to Melania's politics or policies, but to her poise, her timing, her refusal to be drawn into a conflict she had already won by never letting it touch her. The enduring lesson wasn't just in the moment, but in its afterlife. Political strategists took notes. PR firms studied the cadence. Even social media influencers, who usually traffic in overexposure, started exploring the value of the well-timed disappearance, the dignified non-response, the rejection of the algorithm's need for immediacy. Melania had done what few in the public eye ever manage. She turned the denial of energy into an assertion of dominance, and in doing so, reminded the country of something it had almost forgotten, that sometimes, not reacting is the loudest statement of all. Even months later, the quote, short, sharp, and surgically unbothered, appeared in graduation speeches, political stump speeches, and leadership webinars, each time reframed as a modern masterclass in cool resistance. It is ironic, then, that a figure so often criticized for saying too little became the author of a line that would echo across partisan divides, ideological silos, and institutional boundaries. Melania Trump, with her linguistic reserve and aesthetic restraint, had delivered a comeback that worked not because it struck back, but because it stood firm, and in that firmness, she redefined not just her role, but the shape of public discourse itself. The room had gone quiet because no one knew how to respond to a line so compact, so cold, so complete. And in that stunned silence, the audience was forced to consider a more difficult truth, that authority cannot always be narrated, or justified, or voted for, it must sometimes simply be claimed. And Melania, who had long been accused of being aloof or detached, had done just that. She didn't win an argument. She dissolved it.